So, yeah, welcome everyone to the fifth panel of this Love and War conference. I'm absolutely delighted to be back in Belfast, and thank you to Ruth and Alison for inviting me, and delighted to be chairing this panel. And on this panel we have Dr. Sabiha Allouche and Dr. Moore Cohen. And Sabiha is going to be talking first, and her paper is entitled "All is Not Fair in Love and War: Historical Amnesia and Non-Futurity in the Lebanese TV series Fire on Fire." So, Dr. Sabiha Allouche, while being primarily situated within feminist and queer studies, her work engages with migration and refugee studies and the literature on desire and social mobility. She is interested in the racialized and gendered logics that affect how we move through the world. She sits on the editorial board of MERIP, is that? Or MERIP? Middle East.
I can't remember.
Okay, don't worry. Well, we can check later. Don't worry, relax. The editorial board of MERIP and Middle East Critique. So, welcome, Sabiha.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So thank you, everyone. Very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ruth and Alison. I think my North Irish counterparts can understand this, could make sense of this cacophony of actors. Yeah, I mean, if I were to visualize the contemporary context of Lebanon, where my paper is based, I think this slide could do it justice. So in my paper, investigate three distinct affective threads, maybe two, I don't know, I'll see how the time goes. Affective threads in the Lebanese series Fire on Fire, in Arabic it's called An-Nar bin-Nar, to argue that the series' shortcomings in capturing the full genealogy and quality of anti-Syrian sentiment in contemporary Lebanon has more to do with the limits of language in confronting the ghostly and spectral nature of the status quo than the producer's reluctance to ask difficult questions. Now, the series' raw depiction of explosive encounters between Lebanese and Syrians and the ensuing discomfort it produces has been praised by critics who note the series' ability to agitate because it compels the audience to look inwardly and to reflect on its own role, no matter how minute, in contributing or undoing the anti-Syrian racism in Lebanon. At the same time, the series' unwillingness, perhaps inability even, to weave together the myriad gendered, racialized, and classed threads it engages with leads me to view it, at best, as a contemporary mirroring relic. I investigate the series to diagnose the discursive mechanisms that both obstruct and facilitate the emergence of post-national futurities, whilst being largely informed by the late Mark Fisher, who reminds us that, quote, "The future is always experienced as a haunting, as a virtuality that already impinges on the present, conditioning expectations and motivating cultural production." I ponder the present and afterlives of the series' villain, Amran, and two or three dyadic configurations. So I call them dyadic configuration as opposed to couples because not everyone is a couple per se, but they overlap, right, with what we think about a couple. Whereas Amran personifies the permanency of state violence that ordinary citizens and residents, be them Syrians or Lebanese, must contend with as a fact of life, each of the dyads are representative of distinct modalities that capture uneven effects for remembering, and thus affecting the possibility of post-national and post-colonial futurities. Let me start with the paper. This is a bit of a background. Sometimes it's, I'm not sure how many of us are trained, in some degree in Middle East studies or history or whatever. So this is a quick timeline of major events that are directly consequential, I would say, impactful on contemporary Lebanon. So after World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapses. Bonjour la France. This area, which is Greater Syria, so that's Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and Jordan, are divided. They used to be the Great Syria, but the French and the British, they did their thing. And so the breakup of Greater Syria into artificially generated geographical enclosures contrasted with its human richness, largely enabled by varied, fertile, and overlapping geographies. And I draw on the work of Michel Provence, who wrote a subaltern history of Syria, who tells us about this time in history. Arabic was the common language, spoken by Jews, Muslims, and Christians of the various sects, and also lots of other minorities. And very important here to note that despite the supremacy of Sunni Islam during the Ottoman period, exemplified in the blatant legal discrimination against non-Muslims, notably Jews and Christians, the millet system in place allowed non-Muslim leadership to form an auxiliary to Ottoman imperialism by effectively guaranteeing various Christian and Jewish communities across the empire religious and civil autonomy in return for social, fiscal, and political subordination. And this once upon a time intersectarian communitarian synchronicity, which has been theorized by Makdisi as a ecumenical frame, albeit racialized and classed, will soon be replaced by relentless divide and rule along sectarian lines in Lebanon and anti-sectarian lines in Syria. Now, I retell this history not as a plea for a neo-pan-Arabism worthy of the 21st century, at the risk of reiterating an identitarian framework over a politics of difference, or to posit a bygone era of religious coexistence as an irreproachable utopia. Rather, I do it to alert the reader to the pitfalls of, there are three of them, the pitfall of presentism and methodological nationalism when approaching the contemporary Middle East. Two, the fallacy of embedding sectarian difference with a timeless naturalness at the expense of engaging with sectarianization processes that relocate Western powers' geopolitical grievances from the colonial era to Bush's war on terror onto proxy settings in the global South. And three, neglecting the fact that US interest in the region is the raison d'etre in the first place that would, for the very existence of the field that would become eventually known as Middle East Studies. So let's move a little bit after, to 1943. Lebanon is independent. I say independent, right, between, it follows with so between 1943 and the breakout of the Civil War, one of the most important events that happened is the influx of Palestinian refugees who had to leave Palestine following the Nakba in 1948, which was, I believe, yesterday or the day before was the anniversary. I'm not sure what the word is, for the Nakba. And and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, but also in the contemporary time, they remain refugees, right? So, I'll get to that at some point. 1975, 1990, the Civil War breaks out. Let me... So the Civil War breaks out. There's a very dominant, actually, narrative that describes the Civil War as the war of others, right, on Lebanese soil. La guerre des autres, by Touaini. I don't remember his first name, but obviously I refuse to absolve, right, the agency of the local elite, militias, people from it. We can discuss it later. But basically, even though the war largely happened along sectarian lines, where are they? The Palestinians' presence in Lebanon was also largely blamed for it, right? So in the sense that the geopolitical grievances in Palestine/Israel crossed into the border, and and we have to be very nuanced here in our understanding. So the Palestinians did have a lot of popular support, but they were also instrumental, right, to how the elite co-opted the discourse around them for their own interests. Israel invaded the country in 1982, and let us not generalize Christians. Let us not generalize Muslims. We're really talking about sects. We're talking about Shia. We're talking about Sunni, Orthodox, Maronites, Armenian. The Jews left. What else? Evangelicals, Protestants, like, yeah, and it's very difficult to make sense, you know, of, Anyway, in 1990, we have something called the Ta'if Accord. Again, my North Irish fellows might have heard of consociationalism, right? Whatever that means. But usually it's a theory, right? In classic political theorizing, when a place shared powers, right, between the different fractions in it. Now, the most important thing to know from the Ta'if is that although these accords stopped, the hostilities on the ground, they gave credence to and legitimized existence Lebanese militia groups by absorbing them into parliament. So literally, until these days, our members of parliament are the same sectarian leaders who had the money, who instrumentalized the sectarian sentiment, for their own interest, etc. And also another important thing is the country was placed under the hegemony of Syria. So in international relations circles, this period is known as Pax Syriana, and and it was dominated by arbitrary arrests, prevalent disappearances, and an overt belittling of Lebanon's sovereignty. It also simultaneously allowed thousands of Lebanese and Syrian citizens to engage in financially lucrative transnational ventures and to benefit from Syria's universal healthcare, not to mention the long history of marriage between the two countries. Also, during Pax Syriana, hundreds of thousands of Syrian workers flooded the Lebanese job market, having very, very limited protection, a consequence of their minimal pay and foreign status, and most did and continue to face hostile and precarious conditions in their day-to-day navigation of Lebanon's job market. Now, during a so-called post-war reconstruction period, maybe you've heard of Rafiq Hariri. He was the prime minister. He single-handedly took on the task of reconstructing the country. Very well-connected, a neoliberal, technocrat, international figure. It's business, right? So he built his empire rather than reconstructing the country. Very controversial figure. Again, we can discuss it. But interestingly, he carefully navigated his relationship with both Hezbollah and Israel, often opting for an ambivalent position that reiterated support for Hezbollah as the nation's ultimate protector against Israel on the one hand, whilst being elusive on the question also of Israel. Israel stayed in the south of Lebanon until 2000, I think, 2000? I think 2000.
The second time.
Yeah, the second time. Thank you. I don't like geopolitics, etc. But anyway, 2000, and then in 2005, when Rafiq Hariri got assassinated, the Lebanese came together. They held their Cedar Revolution. Maybe you've seen it. It was very heavily televised, almost carnivalesque atmosphere, partying, happy, and everyone called together for Syrian troops and Syria's hegemony to, stop. However, except the Shia bloc, so that would be Hezbollah, who remained pro-Assad. And it's very important to note that although Hezbollah has gained a lot of political influence, a lot in the country, Shia phobia is a thing, and Shias remain socially marginalized in Lebanon. So, yeah, this stayed until 2011. The Arab winter happened. The Syrian civil war broke out, and since then we have the so-called Syrian influx, right, of refugees into Lebanon. So today, the Syrian refugee is summarily blamed for every ill the country is traversing, from its quickly deteriorating health and education sectors to the crumbling of its banking sector to the mass migration of its sons and daughters. Syria's forcibly displaced have been gradually dehumanized in political and everyday talk in Lebanon, from war victims and forcibly displaced to temporary guests, to refugees, to unwanted guests, even parasites. With the Lebanese state's disciplining of Syria's forcibly displaced ranges from imposing curfews to targeting Syrian-owned stores to fabricating rape stories. And actually in the series, one of the first, I think it was the second episode or something, we see this banner being lifted. It says, Syrians are not allowed to gather in public after 8 p.m. And this happened all across the country, not necessarily in Syrian geographies only. And sometimes the municipality itself or the mayor contributed to this. And so a lot also has been written on Syria's forcibly displaced. Europe pathetically terms it a crisis. We can discuss that later. And what I want to say is, I want to argue, the whole analysis of the paper is that the fact that what we get wrong about the Syrian influx is that we examine it through the lenses of geopolitics, international relations, and Europe, instead of being recognized first and foremost as a refraction of the specter of the unfinished business of Palestinian camps, and that a repeat of the civil war is inevitably coming. And this is precisely what leads me to opt for a hauntology framework in my work, with Mark Fisher, one of the scholars informing the analytical basis. And in my work, I understand the Syrian refugee in figuration terms, definitely not in sociological, developmental, humanitarian enough, to explain its construction as a refraction of the specter of Palestinian camps. And to think of the Syrian as a ghostly figuration might not respond to, quote, available intellectual frameworks, unquote, Davis, at our disposal, but its otherness in contemporary Lebanon cannot be extricated from the specter of war. As a result, contemporary Lebanon is best understood as a laboratory for remembering, where one constantly navigates the permanency of war. The process of remembering consists mostly of a guessing work that is geared towards healing. To remember is to correctly link the feeling in question to a precise memory. The triad of body, memory, and their imprecise relationship, i.e. haunting, contributes to maintaining the durability and compression that the specter of war exerts. Again, Fisher recognizes the spatiotemporal dislocations that hauntings produce. A haunting happens when a place is stained by time or when a particular place becomes the site for an encounter with broken times. Now, the violences committed throughout the civil war and its immediate aftermath are yet to be confronted. There is a literature and some cultural productions that have dealt with it. Again, we can discuss this later, but not to a great impact. And here lies the cunning of the specter of war. It is not present, it is not absent either. a justice-oriented remembering exercise is one of messiness, of chaos, and ephemerality. One is constantly confronted to an entangled web of borrowed, imagined, and repressed memories that emerge when least expected. I'm going to move on to our series. So our series, everybody lives in Hayy al-Surur, the neighborhood of happiness, joyfulness. Obviously, it's, the producers are being cynical. And by everybody, I mean the local residents, Lebanese local residents, but also freshly arrived Syrian forcibly displaced. And interestingly, very important to mention about Hayy al-Surur is, unlike real life, the boundaries that generally delimit one community's residential area from another are removed. So it becomes this space, hyper-condensed space of literally every microcosm, you know, in Lebanon. But I also want to point out that we shouldn't think about our residents as from a victim slash, from a victim lens. In fact, most of them rely on what Asif Bayat has called power of presence, defined as the urban dispossessed strive to affect the contours of change in their societies by refusing to exit from the social and political stage controlled by authoritarian states, moral authority, and neoliberal economies, discovering and generating new spaces within which they can voice their dissent and assert their presence in pursuit of bettering their lives. So, this is Imran. This is the main villain. Let's say this is the villain of the series. He is the common denominator that binds all characters together, whether by want or force. He is the son of a Syrian father and a Lebanese mother. Vernacularly, he is recalled as the Mlabnan, or he who performs Lebanese-ness, a quasi-Lebanese, so to speak. He cannot be 100% Lebanese because his mother is Lebanese and thus cannot pass her citizenship to him because of the personal status laws in place. He is a grifter and a hustler. Every event in his life is an opportunity to enrich himself. He embodies to a T the post-Civil War hegemonic neo-Zionist masculinity, the strong sectarian political leader, as a result of the reabsorption of all these militias into parliament. He's a long resident of the neighborhood. He's well-connected and savvy on circumventing the law and taking shortcuts. He presents himself as a father figure to residents and recently displaced newcomers alike. He provides them with advice, money, accommodation, and jobs. In return, he is kept informed on all novelties, and depending on the ask, he would expect completion of specific tasks ranging from simple deliveries to extermination. Imran reenacts the care-control paradigm that neo-Zionist masculinity is predicated upon. Okay, that Imran is Mlabnan is not a coincidence. Throughout the series, he constantly juggles his Syrian and his Lebanese side. He has no particular attachment to either side. It's easy to read him as an easy way out for the producers as to not upset the audience. By presenting our villain, Imran's nationality, as ambiguous, the producers maintain the myth of Lebanon's sectarian balance whilst accurately reflecting the immeasurability of both states' violence. And this immeasurability is noticeable in the remembering modalities of the different dyadic attachments that I relate. No, I'm going to start with Aziz and, so Aziz and Maryam. This is Aziz, and this is Maryam. This is Aziz, where is she? Sorry. Yeah, this is Maryam. So they first cross each other in a now classic scene where they antagonize each other by projecting the ills caused by their respective rulers onto each other. Let's start with Maryam. So she's a forcibly displaced Syrian refugee. When she first arrives to Lebanon, she's wearing the veil. She soon removes it, following Imran's advice, who provides her with a fake passport and convinces her to adopt a new identity. Maryam is a no-frills kind of woman. She has no time for self-pity. She's outspoken against injustice. She often finds herself in the path of Hayy al-Surur residents, helping where she can, She is particularly protective of the young Baroud and Ru'a, whose affective bond I also investigate. Now, very interesting here to add is that Mariam came because she was escaping her husband, who was beating her back in Syria. As for Aziz, he is presented to us as a man in his 50s. His extreme cynicism makes him particularly disagreeable, if you ask me. His retrieval from the world stuns his emotional growth and narrows his optics. The door to his humble flat, for instance, counts no less than half dozen locks aimed at keeping the Syrian invasion at bay, according to him. He's a piano teacher. The piano used to belong to his father, one of many who disappeared during the Civil War and remains unaccounted for. It occupies the central space of the living room. The only company he has is Jamal, his romantically hopeless neighbor, who recalls Lauren Berlon's notion of cruel optimism. And if I have time, I will also examine his relationship with Amar. Now, throughout the series, Aziz and Mariam's adversarial attitude toward each other mellows, perhaps inadvertently. Their embeddedness in another thread, where they come forth in support of a resident facing a challenging situation, brings them face to face again. They soon learn about each other's past traumas, and before we know it, they become an item. Now, if you ask me, their bond recalls many of Hollywood's tiring cliches: the broken man in need of healing, a supernatural female lover who comes to the rescue, an initial opening up, the unrelenting persistence of longing, the amalgamation of their feelings into a romance performed against a backdrop of violence and chaos, and in our case, the semi-officialization, right, of their union. Now, as their relationship develops, Aziz and Mariam become increasingly removed from their socio-political milieu and their bond confined to a bubble of two. Here, romantic love is presented as a pre-cultural floating energy that randomly sticks. One could argue that the bubblification of Aziz and Mariam's romance reduces the complex history and social dynamics between Lebanon and Syria to a free-from romantic dyad that de facto depoliticizes anti-Syrian sentiment in Lebanon by reducing it to a personal matter rather than a historical and structural one. In fact, this was precisely how I originally approached my project. I was particularly perplexed by the removal of the connective patriarchal system that usually informs every aspect of Lebanese society, including choosing a partner. Now, under this patriarchal connective system, persons are encouraged to view themselves as always linked with, reciprocally shaped by, and mutually responsive to family and relatives. In fact, Mariam repeatedly tells us that she will relocate back to Syria with Aziz. However, the viewer is quick to ponder and point out whether Aziz will ever be welcomed by her community, whom she does not contact once. And this is precisely where I am mistaken. Aziz has no immediate family left. He is also politically homeless. It is precisely his aloneness that which allows him to circumvent the limits of connective patriarchy. Add to that his male privilege. As for Miriam, she is not simply a Sunni Muslim, she is a Sufi. Her embeddedness in a mystical realm that transcends the vulgarity of our mundane and silly world allows her to trump the bloodshed and social fragmentation caused by politicized religion and perpetuated by Lebanon's connective patriarchy. Her community, we are given no reason to think otherwise, would welcome Aziz indeed. In another work, I theorize intersectarian cis and heterosexual affective attachments in Lebanon as a queer affair, given the serious disruption they cause to the status quo in place. Aziz and Mariam are a queer item indeed. Little about them makes sense in the grand scheme of heteronormativity and sectarian-informed heteronormativity. And if we are to follow Povinelli, they appear to be out of sync with the apparatus of the cultural. What's more, Mariam at some point had the affections of Imran, whom she rejected. And whether we like it or not, Imran is a catch, perhaps less so in moral terms, but definitely in financial ones. For many, Maryam chose her heart over reason. Marriage is associated with maturity and adulthood in Lebanon. What's more, the rationality of marriage is often contrasted with the irrationality, messiness, and fitna, or social disorders, brought upon self and others when partaken in impossible love stories. Now, neither Aziz or Maryam necessarily ascribe to the institution of marriage. Aziz made this clear on different occasions throughout the series. Maryam herself is escaping her husband. In both instances, they both counter-identify with the demands that the patriarchal system imposes upon them. In line with the queer theorist, the late, again, all the best people are gone, in line with the late José Munoz theorizing on counter-identification, though, their rebellious stance do little to challenge the structure in place, and their very decisions remained informed by it. Their union, on the other hand, enacted within the framework of an impossible love story, imagines a futurity beyond and despite the geographical and ethno-political traps that the state facilitates. Their union, I argue, is best seen as a disidentification. Quote, it neither opts to assimilate within the dominant structure nor strictly opposes it. Rather, it's a strategy that works on and against dominant ideology. This working on and against is a strategy that tries to transform a cultural logic from within, always laboring to enact permanent structural change, while at the same time valuing the importance of everyday struggles of resistance. My time is up, but I'm going to take another 3 minutes to talk briefly about Baroud and Ru'a. So Baroud, this is the young man here. He's orphaned, Syrian refugee. He sells lotto tickets on the street, lives in a disheveled van from which he observes the whole neighborhood. He's presented as kind, smart, and entrepreneurial. Ru'a is Lebanese. She is a child bride who escapes her husband, who is a radicalized Muslim man who was intent on blowing up the neighborhood in a suicide bombing attack, but his plan failed. And it is not clear why he went down that path. Ru'a escaped her husband a day before giving birth to her baby, their baby. While on the run, she comes across Maryam, who asks Baroud to keep her safe and stay with her side. Sooner than later, Ru'a gives birth, and against all odds and expectations, Baroud helps her deliver the baby. He is eerily stoic and serene, calm and resolute, adamant that in his heart of hearts all will be well. Now, before the birth, Baroud was caught up in a serious confrontation with Imran. He shot him, then let loose thousands upon thousands of US dollars stored in Imran's place. The audience is left frustrated by what it views as a missed opportunity for lessening precarity and improving one's circumstances. Eventually, Baroud and Ru'a decide to head to Syria and to start a new life with the baby together. We understand from their short exchange that Baroud will be the breadwinner and will protect Ru'a and her newborn. Taken cue, once again, from queer theorists, I understand Baroud's decision to actively pass on an opportunity to improve his and Ru'a's circumstances as a queer act of failure. In his case, remembering is a futile exercise because there is nothing worthy of being remembered in the first place. Queer acts of failure expects the removal of oneself from the very structure that constructs certain bodies as losers and others as winners. Not only does he refuse to be co-opted by Imran, who promises him protection and a stable income, he shoots him. Okay. And Baroud eventually removes himself from the eat or be eaten game entirely. The cycle of his failure is completed when he decides to return to Syria, the very same place that spat him out in the first place. This time, however, he returns with a new understanding of hope, one where striving to live on the margin rather than fight against it troubles the victim/resilient biopolitical logic of neoliberal humanitarian work. In other words, he refutes celebratory fantasies of refugees' resilience, which often causes more harm than good, by placing the onus on them whilst giving credence to anti-humanitarian and apathetic structures. I conclude, with an invitation to embrace vulnerability. And vulnerability here is not synonymous with victimhood. The construction of certain bodies as vulnerable, after all, has historically served to reiterate a strong-weak binary in global politics, whereby the stronger side kills, annihilates, displaces, and massacres in the name of human rights and democracy. In a similar vein, the inscription of vulnerability onto specific bodies is often juxtaposed with savvy ones who, thanks to doing their best, are proof that structural analysis is a lie and that rational thinking, not the lived reality, is the ultimate indicator of livability and dignity. To think vulnerability as accessibility is to allow oneself to become permeable to others. One becomes permeable when one recognizes the limitations of individual success stories, the impenetrability of neoliberalism's highest echelons, and the fact that the good fortune of some is predicated upon the precarity of others. After all, every success story in our neoliberal age is an extractivist one, and resources, in contra to appearance, are finite. In addition to letting the other in, permeability also serves towards setting one ghosts or trauma free. Let these ghosts narrate the transnational, anti-colonial, communitarian work that has always existed, but rarely recounted in our teaching on empire and colonialism and violent histories. Let the ghosts narrate the violences that history has left behind. Let them remind us that there has always been, that some of us have always been invested in undoing violence and safeguarding others. Now, imagine 7 billion of us with permeable flesh, all taking a load of each other. Thank you.
I think that conclusion was worth the wait. That was fantastic. An invitation to embrace vulnerability. I love it. Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Sabiha. That was a fantastic paper. So next we have Dr. Maur Cohen from the University of Sheffield with her paper, Bilingual Translations in Samira Soraya's Performance. Maur Cohen is Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at the Department of Geography at the University of Sheffield. Her research examines spaces of dissent and the politics of art in Israel-Palestine. She's currently based in Manchester. So welcome, Maur.
So the full title of the presentation is I Have to Confess, I'm a Pervert, I Love Zionist Poetry, Bilingual Transgression in Samira Soraya's Performance. Samira is a 48 Palestinian. Is a term referred to Palestinians who remain within the territories that Israel occupied in 48. And they lived under military regime until the late 70s, and then they kind of received Israeli citizenship only to lived as a second-class citizen and kind of a scapegoat and immediate suspect every time political tension arises. So she's a lesbian director, actor, artist, a former nurse, and one of the founders of the Palestinian Feminist Center Aswat. Performance is one of the main tools of expression for her. It includes drag performances, spoken word performances, music, film, and theater performances. And a common thread that goes throughout her entire performance work, and that's what I'm interested in looking at, is how translation, mimicry, and mirroring is used as a way to transform, or more specifically here, to queer the politics of emotion, and exploring forbidden desires and intimate attachment that are deemed unacceptable or illegitimized within the Israeli public sphere. It was a bit of a challenge to think about these things in the current moment, and I'll just reiterate Sarah's sentiment that is those work gives kind of a way of hope, but it's hard to think about in the midst of genocidal violence and the continuous minimization also of public and academic spaces of dissent within Israeli sphere. So some of the things here are a bit incomplete or unbaked, and I also kind of stop at the latest work of her will be around the COVID period, which suddenly doesn't seem so bad of a period. But yeah. So I will start with the first performance that she did. It's a performance that she reiterated several times on multiple occasions. And this one, she did it as part of a panel that I organized for a conference that looked at the legacy of the Black Panthers movement in Israel, which is a movement that was obviously informed by the Black Party and the Black liberation struggle in the US, but it was formed during the 1970s by Arab Jews in Jerusalem. Most of them immigrate from Morocco and some from Iraq, as a way to protest against the intra-Jewish racism, and kind of one of the first civic disobedient movements within Israeli society that kind of connected the relation between intra-Jewish relations, racist relations, and the occupation of Palestine as well. So in this panel, we explored expression articulation of blackness among racialized body in Palestine and Israel, including Palestinian, Arab Jews, but also Ethiopian Jews as well. And in this performance, she basically recites a poem called El Hatzipor, is To the Bird in Hebrew, written by Chaim Nachman Bialik in 1891. He's a Jewish poet who was born in today's Ukraine, settled in Tel Aviv in 1924, and is considered one of the pioneering poets in the way that he revived Hebrew as a modern poetic language. And is considered to be basically Israel's national poet. So she recites that poem in that performance. So I will show it to you, and then I'll read the translation.
שלום רב שובך ציפור הנחמדת, מארצות החום אל חלוני, אל קולך כערב מנפשי חלתה בחורף בעוזבך מעוני. ספרי, זמרי ציפורי היקרה, מארץ מרחקי נפלא, הגם שם בארץ החמה היפה, תרבינה הרעות התלאות, הגם שם בארץ החמה היפה, תרבינה הרעות התלאות. הירד כפנינים הלטל על החרמו, אם ירד כיפול כדמעו, ומה שלום הירדן וממה הבירים, ושלום כל ההרים הגבעות, ומה שלום הירדן וממה הבהירים, ושלום כל ההרים הגבעות. ואחי העובדים הזורעים בדמעה, הקצרו ברינה העובד, מי יתן לי עבר ואהבתי.
Abruptly cut it because, as you can see, it was made on Zoom, and there was someone who forgot to unmute themselves. So, but you get the gist. So, as I said, this poem was written by Bialik to the bird in 1891, and the translations goes like this: "Greeting to you, kind bird, upon your return from the hot lands back to my window, back to your pleasing voice, my soul perishes. In the winter when you leave, sing, tell me, my beautiful bird, about the wonders of the distant land. Is it full of evils and hardship also, there in the hot, beautiful land? Does the dew drip like pearls on Mount Hermon? Does it drip and fall like tears? And how fair is the Jordan and its clear waters? And how about all the mountains, the hills? And my brother, the workers who sow with tears, have they harvested the omer with joy? Oh, that I had winged to fly to the land where the almonds and date palm blossom." So this is Bialik's first published poem in Hebrew. He wrote it when he was 19. And it's basically tells a story of a migratory bird that has returned to Europe after flying south to the land of Israel for the winter. And the poet who's never been to the land of Israel welcomed the bird home, full with question that expresses the kind of deep longing that he has to this kind of biblical land. As you can see, the imagery is very much informed not by necessarily contemporary, of how contemporary the land of Israel / Palestine was, but mostly informed by this kind of biblical imagery. But it is also informed by the difficult time mostly Eastern Jews at that period felt. It was a few years before one of the kind of deadliest pogroms, but the kind of tension already exists back there. So the performance that Samira did suggests some kind of a methodological, technical and political question that Samira engages throughout her work. And this is, how do you express on stage to the audience, often mixed audience, many Israelis as well, emotions that are not considered to be legitimate, the legitimate form of expression within this environment. How can Samira express love, longing and desire to the land, and later on, as we see, to queer bodies, without this emotion immediately being perceived with suspicion or denial? But also how to do it in a way that she doesn't lose something of herself. She doesn't lose her artistic integrity. She doesn't lose her political stance. She doesn't lose her mother tongue in that process of translation. And this is where Zionist poetry unexpectedly enters. The reciting of a Zionist poem enables Samira to deliver herself to other, to reach and to touch other without her body steering any resistance like it might do under other circumstances. Samira makes herself and her fully present in a society that believe that such strong sentiment and attachment to a land can only be felt by the settler group, and this is a kind of sentiment that Bialik himself articulated in one of his early lecture. Through this performance, she insists on her right to feel, and she manages to exploit an emotional mechanism of the system, finding a way to deliver illegitimate pain and longing through means that no one can object or question. But from the way Samira talks about and feels Zionist poetry, I would suggest that you get the sense that using Zionist poetry is not just a tactic. She described her relationship to Zionist poetry as love, or more specifically, a perverse love. And this is something I want to look a little bit deeper into it, how the perversity and transgression, how perversion or indeed queerness is used in Samira's performance as politics of transgression or transformation, and as a technique that makes use of translation and mimicry to reconstruct emotions and embodied attachment to the land, to other bodies and to language. So the next performance we'll see is from it's a drag performance that she first made it to a Palestinian queer party in Tel Aviv that was organized by the Palestinian LGBTQ organization El Kaus, which means the rainbow. But the footage itself comes from a short film. It's like a 15 minutes film that was directed by Israeli lesbian director Natalie Brown, and it's called Gewalt from 2008. Gewalt is a Yiddish way of a Yiddish call for help, but often within kind of ultra-Orthodox Jewish context within Israel, it's often used as within their protest for different kinds of reasons. They use it as a kind of a signal. It's like a shame, like in the Game of Thrones. The film itself follows a lesbian love story between a religious Jewish woman and a secular one at the eve of the 2006 Pride Parade in Jerusalem. And during a pride party in the only gay club in the city, Shushan, since a few years after that, it was shut down and then replaced by several other only gay club or pubs in Jerusalem. And the whole film is set against the background of violence opposition to the parade from religious movements. So that was a very emotional way of how all the monotheistic movement in Jerusalem came together to oppose the parade. But specifically, this film juxtaposed the party against the ultra-Orthodox Jewish protest because of the reason that a year before the film took place in the gay parade of 2005, an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man stabbed 3 people in the parade. Later on, he was released in 2015, and he did it again, only this time wounded 6 and killing 15-year-old girl Shira Banki. So I will show that performance. I always feel like I don't need to talk after those things. But so, like the poem "To the Bird," there's an interesting play of translation, mimicry, and mirroring as Greek techniques. This time is not through the poem directly, the poem itself, but through the narrative that is presented there and interwoven within the two love stories. The song Wala Maiswa by Hussein Al-Jasmi accompanies a romantic farewell between two Palestinian, I wrote men, but drag kings. One is on the verge of becoming a martyr by undertaking a suicide mission bombing, and the other tried to pursue him, not to do it, but mostly to cope with the coming loss and send his lover away. And through this love story, the Palestinian martyr, one of the most demonized figures within the Israeli public, is being humanized, is made to feel more than just death, more than just a desire to death, something that both the queer body and the martyr body share together. Samira here also relies on an Arabic literary convention to write love poem using masculine declension, both to the speakers and the addressee. And so the song can be performed literally as a man singing a love song to another man, a convention that in itself opens up an unexpected space for queer possibilities, where aspiration for liberation are not entangled with demands for heteronormativity. The performance also prompts us to ask questions about the politics of emotions, values, and duties, and the imbalanced way in which they are presented and discussed in an Israeli context. So the name of the drag performers, Yusuf and Jaber, is a parodical mimicry of Yossi and Jager, two fictional characters of a film bearing the same name from 2002. It centers around a love story between two Israeli armed soldiers that are stationed on the Lebanese border. So it's a kind of a liberal Zionist version of Brokeback Mountain, if you like. So by re-narrating this love story through the eyes of Yusuf and Jaber, the Israeli audience is required to question the moral superiority of Israeli militarism and perhaps the role of homo-nationalism. And the way Jasbir Puar defines it, it's kind of the incorporation of certain non-normative subject into heteronormative national framework as a strategy of pinkwashing. In her performance, Samira replaces the homo-national with the queer martyr. And in so doing, she diverges from the critical discussion of masculinity, nationality, and sexuality proposed by Joseph Massad, which has a very strong critique on the way gendered narrative are intertwined with both colonial forms of nationalism and anti-colonial movement. But some of his work is also being critiqued in recent queer study on Israel-Palestine. So, for example, Saeed Achan in his book Queer Palestine and the Empire Critique mostly focused around Massad's conception of the gay international as some kind of a imperial Trojan horse that infiltrate the Arab society and kind of contaminated with queer ideology, as if different forms of sexuality and queer life haven't existed in Arab society before. But overall, Massad, in another essay, Conceiving the Masculine, Gender and Palestinian Nationalism, show through media outlets how masculinity is the main arch for perceiving both, and he critiques that in perceiving desire, destroyed, and condemned masculinity. So he looks, for example, at the way the Israeli soldier is portrayed as either rapist or protector of the feminized land. In either case, he holds power or virility that has been taken away from the Palestinian, who can no longer defend his land and community. And there is an interesting reworking of homosexuality and masculinity in Gil Hochberg's analysis of Sharif Waked, Checkpoint, Fashion for Israeli Checkpoint. This is a video art that consists of kind of a fashion show of men wearing clothes that supposed to ease the process of bodily search. Well, in between this fashion show, there is a documentary footages of Palestinians being searched in checkpoints, and that kind of produced a very disturbing sexual tension. In her analysis, Hochberg reads homosexuality both as a driving force of state violence and a potential means of transgression. And I think what Samia does in including the queer martyr is refusing binaric or somewhat nostalgic articulation of restored heteronormative relations between the native and the land. Not only she proposes the queer as a freedom fighter, but this figure, as also shown in the film Gewalt, is brought closer both effectively and discursively with other queer bodies. And it's not just the obvious queer body celebrating the Pride Party, it's also the more implicit body of the Orthodox Jew, who's within the European anti-Semitic tradition has been perceived as queer, being effeminate, prone to homosexuality, weak, unhealthy, contaminating. And that Zionism internalized this anti-Semitic trope and sought a way to redeem it, to redeem Jewish masculinity in the land of Israel. And in Geva, there is a parallel romance occurs both in the drag performance and with the two Israeli Jewish lesbian characters. They intersect through the translation of the love song, but also through the background story of the religious woman coming to warn her lover that it might not be safe to go to the parade because of the violent anti-parade protest in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods. In both, there is a plea through exchange of words of love and intimacy, and in both, there is the unavoidable presence of looming death. In the film, the queer space enables the different characters to share desires and fear, anxiety and excitement, and the anxiety and the excitement that come with these desires, and perhaps through this shared experience to partake in the construction of mutual sets of emotions beyond the separatist, sectorialized, heteronormative, and ethno-nationalistic divisions. Here, techniques of mimicry, mirroring, and translation are emphasizing the inevitable codependency in the construction and reaffirmation of identities located on the different sides of the fence. And queerness here is a way to think how the settler and the native can come closer, but outside of the settler colonial framing that inform the current ways of being closer together. Samira in her performance does not only point to this possibility, but also to the Parisian constraints that prevent them from occurring more frequently. She emphasized the one-sidedness of getting to know one through their language and wonder if one can truly love someone without knowing their language. And this is very true in the fact that even though the film shows this kind of possibility through the translation from Arabic to Hebrew, the reality is that less than 2% of Israelis speak nowadays Arabic, even though it used to be the mother tongue of at least 50% of the Jews who immigrate to Israel. And most of the usage of Arabic within Israel is for military and information purposes. The conflation of love, knowledge, and language raises many more questions and direction for investigation that I'm kind of early stage of exploring them. So I'm thinking not how to learn to love someone through their language, but also how to fall out of love when it comes to settler colonial attachment and desires. I will say, though, that the bodily element that it introduced in Samira's performance is critical as it reminds us of this conflation, as well as the embodied ways through which we can gain a different kind of understanding that enables closeness and maybe beyond language, verbal language. This is something that Samira continues doing in her performance, especially nowadays in her as her being part of this of a multilingual music group called System Ali, whose members sing in various mother tongues, but also revived mother tongues, including Arabic, Hebrew, English, Russian, Amharic, and Yiddish. So I think I don't have any way to conclude, so I'll just show you, I think it will be a better conclusion to show you one of their work that they did together. This one was made maybe a year or shortly after the killing of George Floyd, but a few days after George Floyd was killed, there was another killing of Iyad el-Halak in Jerusalem, a young Palestinian man. So the song kind of conflates this thing together. So we'll just end with this song because, yeah.
I can't breathe.
مش قادر أتنفس.
I can't breathe.
مش قادر أتنفس.
החוק לא מגן עליך. החוק לא מגן עליך. החוק הוא תירוץ לעצור ולהשפיל ולמשש את הגוף שלך בחיפוש אחר נשק. בארץ הזאת, להרוס את הגוף שלך זו מסורת, זו מורשת. גברים במדים רוצחים את הילד שעליו נשבעו להגן. אתה כבר יודע, בן, שבארץ הזו ניתנה הרשות לגברים במדים להרוס את הגוף שלך. ואיש אינו נושא באחריות. איש אינו נושא באחריות. בדרך כלל הם מקבלים פנסיה. אל תקבל את השקר, אל תשתה את הרעל. שכחה היא הרגל. הם מחליטים לשכוח, כי אם היו זוכרים, זה היה דוחף אותם מעבר לחלום היפה. זה היה מכריח אותם לחיות כאן, למטה, בעולם.
الوجع هو نفس الوجع والرصاص من نفس المصنع. من اياد الحلاق لجورج فلويد اقعد واسمع ارهاب ضرب اهانات. والعدل والحرية تمثال وتصريحات. وهي كمان أسمر دمه انهدر ومات.
مش قادر اتنفس، اجرك بخناقي تقلك قاطع حياتي. كل الكراهية والإنسانية عدم من غير أي ندم. قلبي مقهور مكسور من كل الظلم وعتمة القبور. بين قصة ورا قصة بنسمع صوت منبوش وكلام مكسور. والدمعة زي النار تنزل على الوجوه.
Что происходит в мире? У меня в стране смерти невинных, правда в стороне. Мне трудно говорить, братан, я не могу дышать. Такому обращению нету прощения. Весь мир в короне, и кто с короной на голове. Нас различают по цвету лица на лице.
אני נאנק, מחרחר. זאת מגפה ששום מכונת הנשמה לה לא תעזור. טרור מדור לדור, אני לא יכול לנשום אל מול היד הקלה על ההדק, מחוסר הצדק, מסיפוח, קיפוח, הפרדה ופילוח, עומד לו שם זחוח. דמו בראשו מצהיר כבוד השר, והרצח הבא הוכשר. עיار ואינקר ונשת אכפר, כמה עוד אפשר? כמה?
I can't breathe.
مش قادر اتنفس.
אני נחנק,
I can't breathe.
مش قادر اتنفس.
נחנק,
I can't breathe.
مش قادر اتنفس.
אני
I
נחנק,
can't breathe.
مش قادر اتنفس.
נחנק.